I just want to talk a little bit about sort of the psychology of brain cancer, but also maybe just first addressing the question of why someone might want you to see a psychologist. And often the first thing we think is, why do I need to see a psychologist? I'm not crazy. Okay? If you see me, you're right. I'm going to out-crazy you by a long way. And look, in the cancer world, and I've worked in oncology for nearly 20 years now, the role of the psychologist is not to support crazy people. The role of the psychologist is to support everyday, normal people going through extreme crisis. All right? And that's what any cancer diagnosis is. But of all the cancers, brain cancer is one of the most difficult cancers to deal with psychologically. Not just because it psychologically affects the way we think and we behave, but who we are as a person sits in our brain. And the changes that happen to us when we're diagnosed with a brain cancer are changes that are changing who we are and how we experience the world. And so I want to talk a little bit about some of that stuff and just, try and get us thinking about how difficult that is, and actually trying to be a little bit gentle with ourselves and saying, we don't have to do this perfectly. We're all doing a really good job, and I would support Kate in saying carers are awesome, and you'll see when I give you a little disclaimer later why I think that particularly, but caring in this role is really hard. Having a brain cancer is really hard. It hurts our brain, but it hurts our heart as well. And I want to talk a little bit about some of that stuff. So one of the things that I think it's really important to just have a basic understanding of is that we can't avoid the fact that having cancer in our brain will affect who we are, how we experience the world, and how we interact with other people in the world. So I want you to have a look at that little diagram in the middle with all the different bits of the brain that are coloured. So, all of those bits of the brain are involved in generating our personality, who we are, how we are seen by others and how we see ourselves. So if we've got a brain cancer in any of those areas, it has an impact on that. And if you look at all of those areas, it's just about everywhere. Our brain is the machine that puts all of the information together that we bring in through our senses. It's the thing that helps us to make sense of the world. It's the thing that makes us who we are. And if we've got something growing in there, or if we've had bits of it cut out, or we kill bits of it with treatment, it has an impact. We can't help but avoid that. But one of the really hard things about it is we don't know when there's a change in who we are and how we are in the world when it's happening in our brain, because our brain is really good at going, no, I'm good, I can deal with this, it's okay. So I'm going to come back to that. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But just to touch on one of the things, that it is important that we remember is that little twist of hope. A lot is changing in the world of brain cancer. And what's happened just in the time since I've been working in this field, phenomenal changes. We are actually much better at keeping people alive for longer. We've got amazing treatments, but they all come at a cost. And I spent some time this morning with a couple, and he has cancer in his brain, and he's 2 years past his use-by date. So he's 2 years past the point at which the doctors told him could be the longest he would expect to live with a brain cancer. Now, every day he questions, what am I supposed to do? I was supposed to be dead and I'm not. And I'm alive, but the side effects from my treatment mean that I'm not alive in the way I was before I had cancer. My life isn't the same. I can't do the same things. I can't drive. I can't ride my surfboard. I think I can climb ladders, but when I do, I fall off and get in a lot of trouble. It's actually a really difficult thing. And one of the things I would say, in supporting Kate in saying be your own best advocate, and this can be some of the hardest conversation you'll have to have, is to be your own best advocate with the doctors when the side effects are getting too much to bear. Because I'm sure you've seen this morning, and I'm sure you've all seen it with your doctors, man, what we can do is exciting. We've never been able to do this before. When I first started working in brain cancer, if you were diagnosed with a GBM, we would expect you to have died within a couple of months. That's not the case anymore. But the thing we have to understand is it's not just about quantity, it's about quality. And it's really important that we learn how to manage that and balance that well. And one of the things that a psychologist can help you with is to look at how do you shift the way you're viewing your life? How do you deal with the fact that your life isn't the same as it was? And people that are complaining about, the quality of life with the treatment side effects aren't necessarily saying, I don't want to be here. But some of it sometimes is just I want someone to hear that this is tough, this is really hard. When they said they could keep me alive, I didn't get that it would be keeping me alive without being able to drive or surf or climb ladders or use power tools or do any of those other things that we're not allowed to do anymore. So it's really important to remember for all of us, the way we relate to any treatment, the way we respond to any treatment is different. But we have to learn to speak for ourselves and say, I need a break. I need you to understand this is hard. I need you to understand I can't be as excited as you are that this treatment is keeping me alive because I don't feel like this is living. And that's a tough conversation to have. One of the other things that the side effects of treatment do is they add a huge amount of burden into our life. So if I'm the patient, my life is more complicated, and if I'm a carer, my life is also more complicated. And so one of the most important things we need to do is learn how to stay supportive of one another. Because what happens in our relationships when it gets tricky is we protect the people we love. I don't want to trouble the people I love. I can see that I'm already being a bother. So I don't tell them how I'm feeling. And do you think that the effect that has in our relationships is to bring us closer? Or do you think that just keeps us a little bit apart? Every time we don't talk about the stuff that's happening for us, it sets us a little bit apart. And it's one of the saddest things in my job is to see people that love each other who are just slowly becoming separated because we're protecting people by not talking about what's happening. But what's one of the greatest gifts I can give somebody who loves me? The ability to support me, the ability to care for me, the ability to carry some of my load. And that's what we do when we talk. It's what we do when we share. And for those of you who are carers, it's important to remember that for those of you who are patients, it's still important that you can be yourself. And if you've been the mum or the dad or the husband or the wife, the sister, the brother, you still need to be able to play that role. It won't always be the same way, but we need to still allow each other to be who we've always been. So some of the things that we can do for ourselves as a patient, and look, it's hard. Brain cancer is one of the hardest cancers to have in terms of looking after yourself and being aware of what's happening for yourself. Because when our brain doesn't work properly, we're often the last person to notice, okay? I know myself. I've got a bit in my eye that's dead. I had a blood clot. So there's a bit of my eye that can't see, that it doesn't pick up any information and send it through to my brain. But do I have a spot in my vision that I can't see? No, because my brain manages to put it together. It manages to cope with the fact that it's not actually working properly. And our brain is awesome at doing this. Our brain is able to adapt and cope. So there are certain times where if something appears in that blind spot, I will walk into it because I haven't actually noticed it and my brain hasn't been able to adapt. I don't often notice when that's happening. One of the things that happens for us when anything is growing in our brain is we don't notice what's happening. And a really easy example that shows that, I think, is something that's called hemispatial neglect. So this happens if your parietal lobe is damaged in some way, and it can be cancer in your parietal lobe. But what it does is it actually stops us putting all of the information together about particularly what we're seeing, but it can also be about what we're smelling and what we're tasting. So you see in the diagram on the left-hand side, as you're looking at it, the clock and the house and the cat. All right? The person has been asked to copy the clock and the house and the cat. Can you see what's happened? They've copied the shape, but all of the information is over on the right-hand side. All right? And so what happens is, if the damage is in the left side of my brain, I won't see bits of the right side of my world. It's not that I don't see them, but I don't put it together. And so when this is happening, one of the things that we'll often say to people that have hemispatial neglect, you know, if it's my brother and he's driving me insane, I will say, just look to the right. That doesn't matter because it's not that you can't see, it's that your brain can't put the information together. But if I ask the person to look at the picture, they can't tell me there's anything wrong unless I really push them to think about what's happening. When I draw those pictures with hemispatial neglect, I don't see what's happening. And I'll argue with you that I've drawn exactly a copy of what I've seen. So it is really important, but incredibly frustrating to understand that the people that are telling you that something's wrong are right, even though you don't feel it. And often for patients, that can be one of the most frustrating things because I know I've drawn a perfect copy. But what everyone else can see is that I haven't. And that's hard. All right? So I really want to flag that can be one of the most difficult things as a person with a brain cancer. You won't recognise when things are going wrong quite often. You'll feel fine, so why would you believe someone when they tell you that there's something wrong? And it's only when we do tests like this that we can begin to see it. But when it's your brain that's not working, you won't. So be prepared to be frustrated. You will always feel more confident. What's the most common conversation I have with people with brain cancer about the worst thing that's happened? You know, I am a good driver. I know I would be fine. And I go, yeah, I know I'm a good driver too, but my record doesn't always suggest that I am. But it's like the classic example. If you can't see, if you can't process information about half the world, you actually can't be a good driver. But you don't know that. Brain cancer does all sorts of things that make us dangerous on the road. It's not us, it's the cancer that's dangerous. But as the patient, we have to bear the brunt of that. It is really, really hard. So one of the things that, you know, people will often say to me is, well, what can I do about this? And look, I didn't have an answer for a long time. It's like, yeah, I don't know, sit around and be frustrated, yell at people. There's not a lot you can do. But now we've got an awesome answer. Awesome? Maybe. Because the one thing we know that will help everyone that has a brain cancer is to do some exercise. Now, some of you may be thinking that that's just further evidence that there is some form of divine being with a very sick sense of humour because, you know, often exercise is the last thing that you feel like doing. But the evidence around the benefits of exercise are overwhelming. How overwhelming are they? The doctors are starting to exercise. I'm not going to say any more than that. Exercise, and look, I've got to admit, in my, late 40s and early 50s have actually started to exercise, and I feel better as well. It's not all about me. It does help with both our physical health and our mental health. And I've given some of the papers up there. You probably don't need to chase up the evidence, but if you want to, I can give you copies. We know that exercise, and this is absolute proof that there is some form of divine being with a sense of humour. The single most effective thing we can do to work against fatigue is to exercise. All right? Now, it doesn't have to be hot, sweaty, exhausting exercise, but it is about going and seeing an exercise physiologist or a physiotherapist and getting a prescription for how to exercise. It reduces the toxicity of treatment. Part of that is because it helps us to process the treatment better. There's a lot of other complex reasons that we think it helps. One of the studies they're looking at doing at the moment in Western Australia, where they're doing a lot of the research into exercise, is to actually administer intravenous chemotherapy while someone is sitting on an exercise bike. So part of what happens is when we exercise, we speed up our metabolism. Most of the treatments that we give intravenously don't need to be in our body for a long time. We want to get rid of them quickly. So exercise helps us to do that. It actually can get us through treatment better, and we know that the people that get up and get moving during treatment actually complete their treatment more often. They make it to more treatment sessions. They feel better after treatment finishes. Now, this is a huge irony for us because even 5 years ago, particularly during chemotherapy and radiotherapy towards the end, I would be saying to you, just don't push yourself. Take it easy. It's completely the opposite of what we were told and what we told patients to do. But we actually know that moving your body is the most useful thing that can happen. There's evidence, and that evidence is in... Now, was it in GBM? It's in brain cancer of some kind, that exercising through treatment increases survival. I'm just going to say that again. Exercising through treatment increases survival, and the quality of that survival is better. The quality of life that you have is better. We've also got really strong evidence that shows us that it helps with our cognitive function. It reduces confusion and the mental fog. All right? It improves mood, so it reduces both anxiety and it gets rid of depression. It's one of the most effective treatments we have for depression, and I genuinely believe within the next 5 years, GPs will prescribe exercise before they prescribe antidepressants. That's a pretty big thing to think about. It also improves our sleep. And it does that not just because we're exhausted and we can't keep our eyes open, but because it's improving all of these other things. So exercise is something that is really, really important. One of the most exciting things that we're finding about the exercise is increasing our exercise helps to actually build neural pathways. And if you've had something growing in your brain and we've cut bits of it out and we've given you treatment, you have disturbed neural pathways and networks. This is something that helps you to make new connections in your brain. So again, it's one of the only things that you can actually do yourself, irrespective of what we're doing with treatment, to help your brain recover from the cancer. That's really exciting stuff. And that's one of the things that I think is most important for you to think about. So I want to talk about caring for carers as well really quickly because I always go over time. And look, my disclaimer is I've been a carer. So this is a picture of my brother-in-law, Peter John Ryan, who died at age 55 from lung cancer, and his sister, my sister-in-law, Lynn Marie Ryan, who died at age 50 from metastatic breast cancer. And they both had metastatic or advanced cancer in their brain when they died, and we cared for them at home. So I've lived with people, on steroids and with delirium. And I've done that thing where you can't actually really go to sleep when you go to sleep because someone might get up and you don't know what they might do. And I live with the mood changes and the sorrow and the grief and the loss, that every day is different, that everything we do is impacted on by this bloody disease. So when I talk about being a carer, I'm talking from my own personal experience. Now, I was a lousy carer for me. I didn't take time out, particularly when Lynn was dying. She was on really high doses of steroids, so she had that thing where not only have you got the agitation, but you're anxious. And sometimes you find a safe person, and you just don't want that safe person to go away. And I was her safe person. So if I left the room, she would cry. So for 6 weeks, I left the house once to come to a really important meeting in Newcastle. And we were in Singleton. I got to Maitland and I got a flat tyre in my car and I couldn't get the tyre off. And I sat in the car park waiting for the NRMA, dialing into the meeting, which I could have done from home. So obviously she had powers that I didn't know of then. But being a carer is really hard. And sometimes it can be more complex than being the patient. One of the things you can do when you're the patient is you can go to treatment. You can do what people tell you to do. When you're a carer, all you can do is look after the person. And often they're sick of being looked after. And they don't want your help. And you're seeing things that they can't see. So the burden of being a carer for someone with brain cancer is just as high as being the person that has the brain cancer. Now, you can argue about that when you get home. But it is really something that we need to remember, because if we're burnt out as carers, if we're emotionally exhausted as carers, we don't do a good job. So we have to make sure we look after ourselves, we have some time to ourselves. We try and make sure we put things in place so we sleep, so we eat, so we exercise as well. And one of the things that it's important to remember is we need to have time out from each other. We need to have ways that we don't spend every minute of the day together. But we can also do things together, you know, if that isn't an option. And so one of the things that can be really important is rest time. If we have rest time in the afternoon, then everybody rests. So we had a sign on the front door that said, "Please don't knock, please don't come in, we're all sleeping." We had a little book and a pencil. So if you came to visit, you could write a message. So people could let us know that they came, but we could have our rest. And let me tell you, going back to work and not having nap time was really hard. Kate actually talked a bit about the respite options. Please think about that. It can really make the difference, and it can save everybody's sanity. We feel guilty when we do it. We feel like we're letting people down, but we actually let people down if we exhaust ourselves as carers. We cannot provide the best care possible. And there are options for respite that come into the home, bringing other family members in. You know, we had a huge army of people that wanted to come in and help. Remember that allowing people to help you is a gift. Instead of getting caught in, "I hate having to ask for help," think about what it feels like when someone you care about asks you for help and you can help them. It's one of the nicest feelings we can have. So every time you let someone help you, you're actually giving them a gift, not a burden. And it's important to remember that. There are a few exercise providers around that will actually be, they're quite happy for a carer and a patient to come and do exercise. So the Caden Centre is at Warrabrook, which is the suburb of Newcastle that nobody ever goes to, because you don't go through it, you have to go into Warrabrook. It was established by a woman who's had breast cancer, bowel cancer and appendiceal cancer, and exercise is the thing that got her through. She's very passionate. So if you go to the Caden Centre, be prepared for Sue's passion. It can be a little bit overwhelming at first, but it's a charity. And so you go, they do an assessment with an exercise physiologist or a physiotherapist. They work out what exercise is going to be good for you. And often after you've had something in your brain, that can involve doing some balance work and trying to get your spatial perception right again. It's $20 a week for as many sessions as you want, but it is a charity. And if $20 a week is too much, then they will negotiate that price down to something that you can afford. And if you can't afford anything other than just giving them a little bit of your personality for that day, that's perfectly fine with them. Ethos Health are probably the other providers that work most with cancer patients, and I think it can be helpful for them to have the knowledge that goes with working with oncology. So Ethos are out at Lake Macquarie Private and in town somewhere. But they have websites, you can have a look, all right? But truly I would think about accessing this, because exercise is the thing that can help us more than anything else. It's something that we can do ourselves, and they will give you exercises to do at home as well if you can't get into the gym. So please think about that. So we need to care for ourselves. We need to care for each other. Find the things that you can do together. So obviously we've talked about exercise. People get sick of me talking about exercise. If you knew me well, you'd think it's hilarious that I talk about exercise this much. But look at how we spend time with people, how we can bring people into the home, how we can make each moment precious. And just go with the good times. And when you're having a good day, do half as much as you think you'll be able to, because we exhaust ourselves by having a good day and doing too much. But spend time with the people that we love. Be sad. Your life has changed in a way that we can't unchange. We can't take that word cancer out of your life. And the other way that we separate from one another is by being sad separately. Be sad with the people that you love. Remember the importance of allowing other people to see your grief, allows them to be sad. It doesn't last forever. You know, one of the hardest things we had to do was have the conversation with Lynn's son. Now, Julian was 16 at this time, and he didn't have a dad. He'd never had a dad. And his mum was dying. And we had big stuff. We had wills to talk about. We had guardianship for him. You know, all of this stuff. And we didn't want to do it. We didn't want to do it. And one Sunday afternoon, he walked in and he picked up the tissue box off the counter. And he said, I am really sick of having all of these little shitty conversations. Can we just sit down and talk about all of this at once? And we went, oh, sure. I have to go to the toilet. Do you have to go to the toilet? Yeah, I have to go to the toilet too. Everyone went to the toilet. We came back. We sat down with the tissues. In 25 minutes, we planned Lynn's funeral. We worked out where he was going to go and who he would live with. We read the will so everyone knew what to expect. We went back and added some songs in because Lynn had been trying to remember the name of the song that she just couldn't remember. But we sorted through all of that stuff. And it was like someone gave us an overseas holiday. We had a party that night because all that pressure was gone. It was done. We could all stop worrying about what might happen because we were safe. We knew what was happening. But man, we cried. 25 minutes was all it took. And it shifted everything. It's really important to just recognise the power of, if we face our fears, if we confront the things we're most afraid of, we don't have to do it again because it's done. Spend time making memories. We should all do this. One of the simplest things you can do, and it's one of the most beautiful gifts that you can do for anyone you love, irrespective of whether you've got cancer or not, is find your favourite photo of the two of you and get it printed and just write a little story on the back about what's special about that moment. What's the memory that sits there? I want every single one of you to think of someone that you've loved that isn't here anymore, and think how amazing it would be to just be able to turn over a photo and hear their story. It's a beautiful thing. We often think we have to do amazing things to make memories. Sometimes we just have to put them down on paper. And look, you can come and visit someone like me. I'm at Genesis, the guys at the Mater in the psycho-oncology service are there. There are private providers. It is useful to find someone that knows a little bit about cancer. All right, there are plenty of social workers that you can also talk to. They have awesome listening skills. And they know heaps of stuff. Like all that stuff is just in their head. And they know the way around everyone. I thought it was only Lorraine that had that secret line to Centrelink. But think about talking to someone. You can come into my room and you can be happy or sad or whatever. I'm a bit of a wuss, so I try not to be the first person to cry, but sometimes I am. But you can't burden me, and you can't let me down, and you can't make me feel guilty. You can just talk about what's happening. And that's what I spend most of my time doing with people, is just listening to how tough this is and coming up with some strategies that we can put in place to maybe try and make it a little bit easier. But don't tell anyone. The most important thing I do is just listen, because sometimes you just need someone that can hear you. And look, think about how you can do things apart. You can actually spend time with family and friends, but do it in separate places. You can, it's important, particularly when you're frustrating each other, to just step away. And that might just be into different rooms for 5 minutes, but don't stay in that frustrating, difficult, annoying space. Try and make sure you check in with everyone and just see whether the way things are going are what people need. And that can be really important with the kids particularly. And Canteen is an awesome service. Please use them. They provide incredible support, and they've got an awesome environment that's safe for kids. So please think about using the access services. And again, you can visit the psychologist separately. Sometimes I see couples together, sometimes I see them apart. Sometimes I see them together and apart. None of them are crazy. They're just normal people struggling with overwhelming stuff. All right, I don't have anything else to say. I do, but they'll kick me. Thank you.